If you are concerned about how the price of gasoline has practically doubled in recent times, stay tuned to this video because we've got something to show you. The graph you are seeing on screen shows how oil and gasoline prices have evolved over the last few years. So far, everything seems normal. As you can see, historically, both prices have followed steady trends, practically parallel. However, now I want you to take a look at what has happened since 2022. As you can see, although the price of both products has increased lately, the curious thing is that the price of gasoline has increased much more than the price of oil. A bit odd, don't you think? At the end of the day, gasoline is a petroleum derivative whose price, which in normal situations, should be linked more or less stably to the price of crude oil. But as you have seen, this is something that is definitely not happening. In terms of energy, the year 2022 has been anything but normal. So the question is, what reasons are there to explain why gasoline has skyrocketed in price in relation to oil? Why is all this happening right now, and not 3 or 5 years ago? Is there a major culprit behind this whole situation? Well, today on Visual Economic, we will answer these questions. On Visual Economic, we will see why the fuel par excellence has become so expensive. So if you want to know the answers, stay tuned. If we are clear on one thing so far, it is that the price of gasoline has begun to become strangely detached from the price of oil. It has started to rise much more than it apparently should. And if you think about it, this can only mean one thing. It means that between the time when oil is bought on the international market and the time when gasoline enters our vehicles, there must be something or someone who has started to take more money than usual. The famous middlemen. Now then, who is making a killing with the new gas prices? Which middleman has started making more money than usual? Well, Visual Economic viewers, if we want to know the answer to this question, the best thing to do is to look directly at the data, see for yourself. The figure you're looking at right now represents the money taken by each intermediary in the US gasoline production chain during April 2022. To summarize, what this graph explains is that out of every $100 worth of gasoline, $60 went to pay for the cost of the oil, $17 went to pay for the refining process, $11 went to financing distribution, and finally $12 went to pay for taxes. So far, well, nothing particularly noteworthy. But wait a minute, because as we previously said, this is what was happening in April 2022. A period when prices had not yet reached their peak. And the most interesting thing about all this is not how the cost was distributed in April, but how that same cost changed completely just 1 month later. Check it out. As you can see, after the May 2022 price hike, there was a major beneficiary among all these intermediaries. The refineries went from charging $17 for every $100 of gasoline sold to receiving no less than $26. To give you an idea, while in April, refineries charged 69 cents for each gallon of gasoline sold, just 30 days later, in May, those same refineries selling exactly the same product charged as much as $1.15 per gallon. This represents a not inconsiderable increase of 67%. In just 1 month. So yes, if you have clicked on this video looking for culprits, here they are. Refineries are the perfect neck for the public guillotine, a target that obviously has been very good for the politicians on duty to get the problems off their hands.
Biden calls on oil refiners to produce more, cut profit margins. In letter to company heads, Biden says historically high refinery profit margins are hurting US consumers.
Let's be clear. Although politicians always try to look for big culprits to offload their problems, we cannot say in this case Joe Biden is wrong. Or at least not entirely wrong. Indeed, as you can see from this graph, many of the world's largest refining companies have recorded increases in profits of over 400% this year. Right now, I bet many of you may be thinking, big companies are already taking advantage of their greed to harm us all. Well, slow down for a moment, because if you think about it, there is something that doesn't add up. Haven't companies always been greedy? In other words, if the problem of high gasoline prices is corporate greed, why have they gone up just now, and not 5, 10, or 20 years ago? Maybe it's because companies were not greedy in the past, and now they are? Well, I don't know what you think, but on Visual Economic, we believe that this explanation is not very plausible. Greed, however reprehensible it may be, has not been the origin of the problems we are currently facing. We believe that there must be other underlying reasons that are allowing refiners to increase their profits only now and not years ago. Something that, going back to Joe Biden's news item, would have a lot to do with political management. So, with that said, the question is clear. What exactly is it that has allowed refiners to be able to raise their prices just now and not 5 years years ago. What has changed recently? Well, let's take a look.
No one to stop me.
If there's one thing that all economists of all stripes are clear about, it is that when companies are able to charge much higher prices than normal, it is due to at least one of the following two factors. Either they have no competition and can set whatever prices they want, or they have a pact with the rest of the competitors to fix manipulated prices. The thing is, it turns out that at least one of these conditions is being met today in the refinery sector. Can you guess which one? Check out this news item.
US refining capacity falls to lowest mark in 8 years amid record prices.
Indeed, everything indicates that the refining industry is not exactly at its best as far as competition is concerned. For years now, more and more refineries have been disappearing from the market, which has led to a major adjustment in production capacity. For example, while in 2017 there were 137 refineries operating in the United States, today there are only 125 still standing. What's more, since 2019, US refinery barrel production has fallen by more than 1 million barrels per day, or more than 365 million barrels per year. But take note, do not be mistaken for thinking that this is only an American problem.
The European Union has closed a total of 24 refineries since 2009, more than 10% of the continent's refining capacity.
The truth is that it is not only US refineries, but also those throughout the West that are dropping like flies. Of course, knowing this, what many of you may be thinking is that if so many refineries have been closing lately, it is simply because, well, they were probably no longer needed. Perhaps with the rise of electric vehicles or the push for green energies, fuel consumption has only decreased. Well, if you think so, I'm sorry to tell you that you're actually very, very wrong. The data, VisualEconomik viewers, suggests just the opposite.
US gasoline demand trend looks stronger into 2022 despite pandemic undertones.
Since 2012, fossil fuel consumption in both Europe and the United States has increased by at least 1 to 1.5%. Yes, I know, nothing too spectacular, but the point is that it has increased. However, take note because this 1 and a bit percent increase only includes data up to 2021, a year affected by the pandemic, where fuel demand was not exactly at full throttle. So if we omit the COVID variable in this analysis and use the 2019 data as a reference, we will see that since 2012, fuel demand has increased by more than 7%. All this taken into account only actual consumption and not the price increase derived from fiscal stimulus. In other words, despite the fact that gasoline demand has been growing over the last decade, for some strange reason, refineries have been losing capacity and have been abandoning the market. And you may ask, what does this all really mean? This means that competition in the sector has practically disappeared. Refineries are currently operating at around 95% of their capacity, and that means that they can barely meet new orders. Or to put it another way, they have a free hand to raise prices significantly without fear of running out of customers. But be that as it may, let's get down to business. What is it that has caused so many refineries around the world to be dismantled in recent years? Why has gasoline production ceased when demand for it has continued to grow? And above all, what on earth has happened right in the middle of 2022 to have intensified and accelerated this whole process? Well, VisualEconomik community, we can find at least two major explanations for the origin of this problem. Pay close attention.
The origin of the nightmare.
The first reason why refineries have closed in droves over the past few years is, as you may not expect this, a lack of profits. Yes, that's right. As much as refining companies are now sailing on the dollar and riding black gold horses, the truth is that until not so long ago, it was thought that this sector was going to suffer serious economic problems. To give an example, in 2017, an academic study was published predicting that companies such as Chevron, Shell, or Sinopec would see their profits from this activity fall by approximately 70%. On the other hand, consulting firms such as Woodmac also predicted a setback of about 9% in refining capacity in the coming years, due to precisely the lack of revenue that many of these companies would suffer. And although now, given the enormous profits of these companies, all of these theories may seem like absolute nonsense, the truth is that until shortly before the beginning of 2022, everything indicated that these hypotheses were beginning to be fulfilled.
When you lose money doing something, how do you react to it? You just stop doing it. That's just what's happening with refineries. Denton Sinkingrana, Chief Analyst, Oil Price Information Service.
Having seen this, there is probably one question most of you are asking. Why on earth did analysts think that the refining sector was going to lose so much money? Well, you see, according to climate criteria and targets set by governments, analysts expected societies, mainly European and American ones, to reduce their fuel consumption sharply in the coming years. In addition to these already poor prospects, restrictions on consumption through taxes, increasingly expensive emission allowances, and all kinds of disincentives to investment in polluting activities did not exactly play in favour of the whole issue. Without going any further, as you can see here, emission charges in the European Union, that is what companies pay in order to be able to burn fuel, have multiplied by more than 10 in the last 5 years. This, as you can imagine, added to all of the above, led several companies around the world to start planning the dismantling and reconversion of their plants. As an example, the company Neste ceased operations at a Finnish power plant in order to convert it into a different one for renewable co-processing and the circular economy of raw materials. ExxonMobil planned to transform its refining plant in Slangen, Norway, into a simple storage facility for fossil fuels. And Hilco, a Philadelphia company that has been refining oil for more than 150 years, decided to invest millions of dollars in converting its old refining plants into a new high-tech campus. All of which is quite logical if you think your fuel is not going to sell in the future. Adapt or die. Now, the interesting thing about all of this is that all of these predictions did not account for one of the most important economic disruptions of the century. In 2020, with the advent of COVID, oil and gasoline prices plummeted, and that, coupled with the poor outlook for the sector, led to many decommissioning plans, such as the ones we've just told you about, to be accelerated at full throttle. And it was right there, starting with a pandemic, that refining capacity began to decrease wildly. So what was the big problem with all this? Well, the problem is that they went too far. Perhaps the analyses instilled more fear than was necessary. Perhaps they did not take into account that fuel demand might not fall as much as the government's climate plans predicted. In any case, the point is that today, refineries are much more scarce than they need to be. And if you think about it, it is precisely those that decided to hold on and invest even more against the bad forecasts that are today recovering the money with extraordinary new profits. But it doesn't end here. To all this, we must add a second factor that explains the refinery collapse. A second factor that is mainly leading Europe to tear its hair out.
The Wrath of Vladimir.
In a previous video that we've linked for you in the description, we talked about how the war in Ukraine actually had little to do with recent high oil prices. We explained that if the price of crude oil has risen so much lately, it has been for other reasons that have little to do with Putin. In the case of gasoline, however, the situation is quite different. It turns out that not all refineries are the same, and not all refineries are the same because not all pre-oils are the same. If your oil is very pure, because it comes from countries like Saudi Arabia, where they practically puncture the ground and dinosaur juice just shoots out, then your refining process is simpler. Now, if the oil comes from Russia and that oil is more impure, then you will require a more specific refining process. You're starting to see the problem now? After the war in Ukraine and the corresponding sanctions, imports of Russian oil in Western countries are becoming less and less common. This in turn is causing many crude oil refineries to have severe difficulties in operating.
Not all refineries are equally flexible, so not all can switch from crude to one quality or origin to another with the same ease, if at all possible. With the sanctions on Russia, there are refineries ready to work with their oil that are now unavailable, even if there is alternative crude waiting to be converted into gasoline. Association of Petroleum Products Operators.
In addition, the war in Ukraine has in turn slowed down the import of Russian gas to the European continent. This gas accounted for 40% of the total supply and is very much needed to produce the electricity with which the refineries process the oil. So basically, electricity has become more expensive, and this has further damaged the prospects and costs of refineries. And knowing this, some of you may ask, why doesn't Europe replace Russian gas with American gas, or gas from other countries? The simple answer is because they can't. While other products such as oil can be transported in large tankers, the technology for transporting liquefied gas, known as LNG, is still in its infancy. As you can see, in recent years, the lack of investment in LNG has left its mark. And that, despite several reports, such as the one by Morgan Stanley, from which this graph is taken, point to the fact that the demand for LNG will not stop increasing. This, in turn, has also been a consequence of the recent demonization of fossil fuels, a demonization that seems to be coming to an end, at least as far as gas is concerned.
The European Union concludes that gas and nuclear are green energies and equates them to renewables.
Be that as it may, visual economic viewers, at this point we must draw the three main conclusions from all of this. 1. If gasoline is becoming more expensive than oil, it is mainly due to the increase in commercial margins received by refining companies. 2. This increase in margins is in turn due to market saturation caused by the lack of investment in this sector. 3. The pandemic and the war in Ukraine have played a key role in accelerating the problems we are experiencing today. At this point, as always, the questions are now over to you. Do you think the refineries' profits are unjustified, or are they just a reward for their investments in times of uncertainty? What solutions can you think of to the problem? Do you think that there are more factors that we have not explained that have contributed to higher gasoline prices? You can leave your answers in the comments. And remember that you can actually highlight your contributions with the thank you button, and that by doing so, you can also financially support the independent media that is Visual Economic. If you liked the video, please like it, activate the little bell icon so you don't miss any of the following videos, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, see you soon.